I was actually telling the stream that, okay, it's saying that we're live, which means we're probably live. All right, gentle modern apes and assorted theropods of the mix here on the council. We're here to have a debate after show and maybe chat about some other things too. So to my knowledge, and this is for those of you tuning in who maybe don't know what's going on, there's a debate over on Modern Day Debate between Ron Garrett and our pal SFT, a member of the SFT Brain Trust and Channel Conglomerate. And, it was about, the topic was kind of all over the place. The official subject was like, is biblical creation scientific? It ended up being a lot more than that, which is totally fine, and I moderated it, so that's why we're here talking about it, because I had to keep my lips sealed. And those of you who know me well enough by now know that I'm not very good at doing that, which is why we're here to blabber and bleed all about it. So who would like to go first? Because I know the three of you, everyone here has, caught the debate.
Yes, I had to watch it on ×2 speed in order to get it between leaving off with Kent with Bent and getting here, but all of those words did enter my brain at some point.
Very, very good, Dapper. And we'll let our resident theropod start us off here.
Oh, man. Well, first I have to say, I am glad that I can usually follow ×2 videos, because I know a lot of people can't, and it's not easy for me, but man, it's a handy skill sometimes, because sometimes you're just like, I have to get through this really fast. But my initial impression was, so you started off with the title of the debate was incorrect initially, and then it was fixed to be the title that had been already agreed on, which was is biblical creationism scientific? But why even bother? Because that wasn't the debate that happened. Standing was completely uninterested in actually having a debate about things like philosophy of science and what reasons young Earth creationists have for coming to their conclusions, and whether or not it's based on science or based on a priori conclusion. Like, none of these things were things he was interested in discussing. So I feel like we didn't get that debate, and I would like to listen to the debate, is young Earth's creationism scientific? Because it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, fair points all around. I felt the same way while I was watching. I was kind of like, all right, this is going to go one of two ways. This is going to go the way Ron wants it to go, which is a discussion of the philosophy of science, or the way Standing is going to want it to go, which is his general spiel. And Standing is quite good at directing the conversation, kind of, right? Like he's smart enough that he can kind of steer it in the way that he wants it to go. And since Ron is just such a chill guy, he was like, whatever. Like, I'll just talk about whatever. I wish that Ron had given at the end. He was like very clearly in the know about genetic entropy, general physics, and like general geology stuff. I wish that in the middle of the debate he had steered it in that direction instead of letting Standing dictate the topic the entire time.
Standing's a regular old Hovland.
Ouch, TD.
Oh,
that is harsh.
Nice. I'm
Standing has a very narrow set of arguments he wants to go to every time, and that overlaps with the arguments that Dr. Ron has a very small grasp of. Yeah,
and I think Ron almost too. Standing's a good guy. I think I know people. Even within our sort of group have differing opinions on the sort of strategy that he takes in debates and in sort of running his channel. But I definitely think that Standing immediately picked up on the fact, like when Ron was like, I don't know this stuff, Standing was like, okay, then that's what we're talking about. Yeah. He did the Scooby-Doo. He was like, okay, let's talk about that.
And only that, apparently.
Yeah, and only that, right. But I mean, and Standing does this thing that I've noticed, and you guys tell me if you've noticed the same thing, but he does this thing where he'll be like, I have discussed this with X person before, and then because he's presenting the opinion as if it's unchanged, despite the fact that it has gone through like a verbal peer review, he kind of treats it as though it stood the test of time. It's like he's had the conversation of the human chromosome 2 fusion so many times with so many different people, and he hasn't changed the things that he's saying, despite the fact that like individuals have been like, hey, listen, the things that you're saying, they don't work. It's not just that they're wrong in concept. They're wrong in their basis as well. Like the fact that he still, to my knowledge, I think, don't quote me on this, Standing, if you're watching, but he still kind of says the telomere fusions don't really happen. But they just do, you know, and I myself have presented him with papers on that very subject.
And even if it's not that specific subject, there's probably listed a dozen different subjects that he uses that same defense on.
Yeah, exactly. You're dead right, Dakota, because you know he's very comfortable, kind of. I don't want to roast Standing for this because I really do like him, but he does a lot of hand waving. He'll just be like, no, that's not a good explanation. And Ron very briefly touched on it when he was talking about Newtonian physics versus relativity, when he was like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he was essentially like, all right, listen, if you are going to overturn a paradigm, you have to have a reason for doing so. And typically that reason is the current paradigm can't answer a certain question. Right, so it's like Newtonian physics didn't work for like planetary shit. I don't know. You guys know this. Dakota, you're the physics guy. You're the
Mercury, and then anything to do with light. So
yeah,
but the time we had the devices to measure the time properly, it was basically the period of Mercury.
There was there's this thing called Aphelion, and it's
that's the one.
It's contrasted with perihelion, and perihelion is when an object is closest in its orbit of the sun to the sun, and aphelion is when it's farthest away. Then there was this thing called the precession of the aphelion of Mercury, where basically every rotation, the aphelion would rotate itself around the sun, basically. So it would continue to progress. And it was doing that in a way that was not predicted by Newton, which is one of the reasons why astronomers started looking for another planet even closer to the sun, because that could explain it within a Newtonian framework. So that was one big problem. They just couldn't find this other planet, which they had hypothetically named Vulcan, by the way, because it was even hotter, so they named it after the Greek god of the forge.
Right.
There you go. Which then was, in fact, adopted into Star Trek as the name of a planet and a species based on that whole idea. That's why Vulcan is a very hot planet. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Wait, I thought Vulcan was the Primarch of the Salamanders.
Well, okay, there's that too, but again, also because of the Greek god of the forge thing. Anyway, so the other big thing was the invariance in the speed of light given direction. So at least the two-way speed of light was always anisotropic. It was isotropic. It didn't matter which direction you were facing. The speed of light was always measured to be the same thing. And so these two things were both explained very neatly by Einstein's general, first his special theory of relativity, and then later on adding to that with things like accelerating bodies and whatnot, the general theory of relativity. But the thing is that for almost everything you would ever do in your entire life, there is no reason to use relativity equations.
Even NASA, if they're doing from intercepts, they still use Newtonian mechanics for the most case.
Yeah. You can fly to the moon and you can fly to Mars and back without ever needing to touch a single thing that Einstein ever did.
Yeah,
ever.
That is so.
You don't need it.
No.
I did not know that.
You need it if you want to calibrate your GPS to the tightest margins.
Right.
But you can get to Mars. Yeah, but as Dapper said, you can travel from. You can plot a intercept course on a satellite to, a probe to any planet without having to deal with Einstein.
Yeah.
Holy moly, we got almost 60 people watching.
60 people. Thanks, guys.
Nice.
Thanks for tuning in.
55 currently.
And the thing is,
but only 18 upvotes, folks.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a problem.
Shame on you. Y'all are a bunch of, I would say you're Neanderthals, but
wow. Harsh on the Neanderthals.
I was going to say it's an improvement. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Sorry, Dapper, continue. I like to thank the gang, though.
So the thing is, for almost everything that anyone is ever going to do, including most space travel, the difference between Newton's equations and Einstein's equations is going to be within the margin of instrument error. So yes, you could use Einstein's equations to calculate what's going to happen in a car crash. But no instrument that you are going to use is going to be able to differentiate between which equations gave you better results. And the same thing is going to be true if you're flying to the moon, right? You can use all the relativistic equations and everything to calculate the local geodesics and space-time and all of that. It won't matter because your margin of error will be less than an inch, basically, even at those scales. So it's only at very extreme scales that Newton starts to break down. And the same thing is going to be true if anyone ever overturns our current understanding of evolution. Evolution explains so much of biology so well that any errors in it could only be extremely marginal cases.
Well, and it's not just that, Dapper. Biology as a whole is so interdisciplinary, and it's got fingers in all sorts of different, fields that are both within biology, just outside evolutionary bio, and even outside of biology. For evolution to break down, that would have, it wouldn't have no bearing on geology and no bearing on subfields of biology like genetics and ecology and the anthropology. God, it would touch everything. And Ron was so right when he was like, this would be probably the biggest overturning done to date. Which, makes one wonder, okay, if you could do that, there's all the incentive in the world to overturn it. And that's kind of where Ron's quote unquote argument from authority was coming from. He wasn't saying all these people believe it, so it's true. What he was saying is you have to have a reason, like a legitimate reason that is supported by data as to why these individuals are all getting it wrong. Right?
Yep.
Which is wild to me. I think it's wild.
No, yeah, you're definitely right. And that's one of the things is there really is this, why is it that no one is right about this? And everything is so much the opposite of what everyone knows it to be. Like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that evolution could just be completely wrong. And instead we're getting this, like, young Earth creationism. I'm sorry, there just is not an option that leaves young Earth creationism as an accurate picture of the world.
Trickster deity is the only legitimate option.
Yeah, they invoke that pretty much every time they say common design, because it's just like, why design synapsids in mammals so similarly? Doesn't make any sense.
And what kills me too is Standing's like recent heavy reliance on the motif from replacing Darwin. I say recent, it's been going on for several months, where he's like, we, meaning creationists, predict nested hierarchies and
which no, you don't.
Forms. Yeah, and it's like, okay, you do know predict would require digging about and finding a previous creationist saying, yes, eventually down the line, perhaps we may see this according to the biblical model, instead of what we do see, which is a fervent and vitriolic denial, pulling them, just kicking and screaming into the idea of accepting that these organisms, first of all, just aren't frauds, that they're legitimate, animals are alive, let alone their nature of looking very much like transformed forms. And Ron's quote from Todd Wood was lovely. I thought that was a great way to kind of finish his, I think it was his opening statement, where he was just like, look, Todd Wood's not an idiot. And Todd Wood is also not deceptive. Like, you can't, I have a hard time, like, imagining that there are individuals in this field who do the things that they do, the likes of Georgia Purdom and Andrew Snelling, for example, who don't at least have an inkling that something is amiss with their worldview, like Todd Wood does. Yeah, I mean, he's like, I believe what I believe on faith. Like, evolution appears to be very well supported.
Yeah, the problem is that Andrew Snelling is just a liar.
How about that last? I'm coming for Standing on the geology at some point, because and I don't know geology that well, but his whole thing where he's like bringing up the polonium halos.
Oh.
You know, and
It's so heavily debunked. It's just like, why?
No, not only is it debunked, it's debunked on Talk Origins, which was updated like 5 centuries ago. You know, I mean, it's insane to me that we're still having the conversation about polonium halos, and the rate group, like the audacity.
We're still having conversations about quote unquote polystrate fossils. That hasn't been current since the middle of the 19th century.
The polystrate.
I've read that. I've read that 1860 paper. Yeah, it is that old.
My god. That reminds me of the time that we all tracked down that Neff source from Manetho for the.
Oh yeah, and it was just what was it? It was a Morris or Gish or who was it?
I think it was Morris. Morris was quoting someone who was quoting someone. It was like 4 or 5 quotes down the line. And the original interpretation was like, there was a disaster, and like Amun saved us. And then it turned into Egyptians have a flood myth of a global deluge catastrophe. And we're sitting there like pulling up papers from the early 1800s. It was insane.
Do you know who the originator is for AIG's claim that the average size of a dinosaur is about the same as a sheep?
Oh, please tell me. I know it's going to really irritate me.
The source for that is Michael Crichton in his novel Jurassic Park.
Oh,
That's not a reliable source.
awesome. That is incredible.
Yeah.
The top brass.
That's as far back as anyone has been able to trace it, and that was RJ who traced it that far back, and you know what? Yeah, as far as anyone can tell, the only source saying that the average size of a dinosaur is that of a sheep, Michael Crichton, because Dr. Wu says that at one point in the book.
It's just astonishing. You know, it's astonishing to me that that's the level that we reach at points. You know, and this is a bit rough to say, but part of Spart says Spart's 344 says, Eric, are you willing to rate SFT's slideshow now? Yes, I've seen better slideshows from SFT. This slideshow was not nearly as aesthetically pleasing as most of his slideshows were. I find that just using pictures from papers, like screen grabs of papers, needs to be interspersed with some pictures or you lose people's attention. So aesthetically, I would say he has done better in the past. My colleagues feel the same.
Where's the classic Team SFT style memes? Where are they?
We like the memes from SFT, and I think SFT is in the chat, which is lovely. We love you, SFT. We want the memes back.
Standing. Wait, I thought Standing was on her own. His own. Are you on your own after show and also in the chat here?
No, Standing hops around. He hops around.
Okay, because that's some impressive multitasking.
No, Standing is an impressive multitasker, but I think he's just hopping around right now. To my knowledge, we do occasionally get the LPP gang in here. Although I don't know, I know we all have different opinions on this, but I tend to think of the LPP gang as explicitly being like Otangelo, LPP, and Smokey. Whereas Standing is kind of like him and Raw Matter, like they're separate, their own clade. They're members of the same species, but they're different species. We need a creationist phylogenetic tree is what we need.
Oh, you know, I will say, I think we need to make a new drinking game for these debates. Every time Standing says Jensen makes predictions, drink.
I'll be dead.
Yeah, I would rather survive the next few years. Thank you.
That's I don't know about that one, TD. I feel like that's an assault on my life.
That would kill Colton.
That would kill Colton. That would kill
Colton.
That's
Colton's idea of taking a drink is like down a double shot. So
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
There is actually one thing I want to point out, which is there's this complaint that how come you're not making a prediction, and it seems like it's in the context of this debate, and the reason for that is because internet debates are not where scientific predictions get made. It's in the literature. There are when I say a lot, okay, because I'm going to say there are a lot of evolutionary predictions being made and confirmed daily. When I say a lot, I mean thousands every day. Novel predictions made by evolution and thousands a day of not predictions of evolution, which are confirmed, but they are in the literature. You need to go and dive into the actual peer-reviewed papers. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please. I totally interrupted you. I had a thought that kind of popped in my head. Please finish your thought.
Well, that is basically it. It's like, it's not that there isn't predictions being made. It's that, no one who is active in the actual field, who's making the predictions about future data in terms of things like human ancestry or common descent or genetics or anything, is someone who has the time to come on YouTube and talk to a few hundred people in a live chat on modern day debate. They are people who are busy writing actual papers for journals. I do it because, I don't have a job as a researcher. If I did, I would be researching and I wouldn't be here.
They'll be prepping for the speech in front of 200 people at the next biology conference.
Right.
Yeah, and so the thing is too about that, and this is something that I've kind of been bopping around, as I haven't done any formal looking into it, I guess would be the way that I would put it. But when it comes to evolutionary predictions, they tend to turn out a lot like historical predictions in the realm of history or archaeology, where you're like, I feel like based off of what we know about this civilization, or in the case of evolution, this species or lineage, that we should find this here. Or we will find evidence that will further corroborate this. And I think creationists often like to, they like to think that that's a retrodiction because it occurred in the past.
No, that's not how that works.
But that's not how that works. And I think the question, when Standing can correct me if I'm wrong because he is in the chat. I think he is watching a movie though, so maybe he's not listening to the actual audio. If he does come across this later, I'll pose this question more formally to him at some point. But I think, here, Dan is here. Let's let Dan in.
Yay, Dan.
Hey,
What's
Dan.
up, Dan?
Hi.
Dan,
I'm sorry I'm late.
No.
Oh, that's
you're
You
here.
had a baby, so
Oh,
Yeah,
God, yes. You got offspring. That's
Feeding
By the way-
a baby, and then my wife and I trade off, for the overnight stuff. So we just.
If you didn't know in the chat, Dan, just brand new baby, so congrats. Send all the congrats over to Dan.
3 weeks.
Please send
3
congrats.
weeks old today.
Month.
3 weeks today.
3 weeks. Oh my God. Oh, that's so cute. Well,
All right, but
Dan,
Dan, are you going to be one of those parents who says, "Oh, my baby is 42 months old," and I'm like, "Oh, gee, thanks for the math problem"?
no,
Okay.
Dapper, the people who do that inevitably breastfeed their child for too long as well. They've got a whole coming up and breastfeeding if they're using the months. And let me finish my thought because I will forget it, and then I want to hear your thoughts on the debate.
Oh my God, thoughts.
Yeah, I figured you would. You're our genetics guy anyway, so we've mostly just we've been rating the slideshow. We've been doing all of the initial impressions. But what I was going to say was that I think when creationists say they want predictions from evolutionary theory, they literally want us to predict what's going to happen in species. And they don't want predictions of what's going to happen in species that are microevolutionary according to their own ideas, like Drosophila or bacteria. They want predictions on species whose results we would not see for centuries. They want us to say elephants will do this, and it can't be or they will turn into this. But the problem is, the statistical process of even accounting for a millionth of the variables that play into population genetics and mutation chances, and even the possible mutations that could occur and could let alone be selected for, let alone what the environment's doing, let alone what the individual animal or plant or whatever is doing. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's not possible.
Yeah, so when evolution makes predictions, again, I was making the analogy, Dan, that it's similar to when we make predictions in archaeology or history. We make predictions about what we think is going to happen, but we're looking at a timeline that has already occurred. Or
we can do little things like that. There's a really cool set of studies on antibiotic resistance, where in the paper that I know, it's Heinemann something or other. It's limited Darwinian pathway to antibiotic resistance or something, or a limited number of pathways. And what it does is looking at a resistance to a specific newish antibiotic. This was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And they found that going from the susceptible state to the highly resistant state, there were only a limited number of pathways. There were 5 mutations, but there were only a certain number of pathways that conferred an increasing number of resistance at each step. So you're able to plot out, like, if you are at these 2 mutations, you would expect this one or that one to be the next one that is selected for. And then there were several studies like this, and then for one of them, they actually found a number of new resistance genotypes, at least one of which subsequently appeared in a hospital. So they were able to specifically predict which resistance genotypes would appear in what sequence based on the selective advantage of the combinations of mutations.
But they were still bacteria.
But they're still bacteria, so it doesn't count. But
have
like
they evolved
that is
into a fully
specific
functioning
prediction,
Tyrannosaurus Rex? No.
Yeah.
Evolution
yeah.
debunked.
When you get your bacteria to turn into a T-Rex, then talk to me.
Right, but that is a very specific, like they said, these are the pathways we expect to see, and then subsequently one of those pathways did appear clinically. So I mean,
yeah. Well, and one of the things so if I'm going to the area that I know a bit more about than perhaps average. So if we look at things like, okay, what about predicted fossil forms, right? So Darwin predicted 3 years before the discovery of Archaeopteryx, based on the morphology of bird wings, that we would find some kind of reptile that looked mostly like a bird, but that would have unfused digits. Because a bird wing from the wrist down, or more technically from the wrist going distally, is essentially just 3 fused digits. Yeah, I'm gonna be very technical here. We use words like distal and proximal.
all right.
Oh my god.
Actually, for my Spec Evo thing, I'm making a style guide, and one of my style guide points is like you have to use words like distal and proximal. You can't just say like away from the like. No, stop. Use terms. Just do it.
That it sucks, but those of you guys probably know, for those of you in the chat who maybe don't, the thesis that I'm writing right now is on primate dentition. So I'm looking at the emergence of secondary monomorphism in anthropoids and maybe strepsirrhines. We'll see. But I've had to learn all the dental terminology, and I want to absolutely throw myself into oncoming traffic. I was talking with a PhD student the other day, and I misconstrued mesiodistal, which is the length of the tooth from the front of the mouth to the rear of the mouth, with height. And I was like, I'm really sorry. I'm new at this. And
I'm not a dentist.
Yeah, and to be fair, he was pretty cool about it. He was like, yeah, I didn't even learn dentition until I started working. He's working on a very specific Miocene ape known as Dendropithecus. And so he was reading about Dendropithecus, and I literally didn't know this shit until I started reading about Dendropithecus. And I was like, let's hope the same thing happens to me. But Dan, thoughts? Give us your general opinion.
Oh man. Okay, so I was able to watch the intro, and I was taking notes as fast as I could go. And like SFT, he's got the Gish Gallop. I don't know if he's still in the chat, but like, man, if you are, you got the Gish Gallop down. It's like when boom, 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 boom. It's just thing, and then like we're just going to do a quick hit, and then we're gone. We're on to the next thing. And
Ron is very good about pointing that out.
The problem is, none of it was right. Like, I got a list here. Like, can I just go through some of these? We'll see how many I can get before everyone gets bored. Like, I got a list of things here, and none of them are right. So, low genetic diversity supports Adam and Eve. No, it doesn't, because the most recent common ancestor, one, is not the origin of a species. It's the most recent common ancestor. The species predates the most recent common ancestor. So, it sets the floor, not the ceiling. And two, the most recent common ancestor isn't the only person. There's lots of people. Those lineages are just extinct. So it's just misunderstanding what that means. Out of Africa is a post hoc, ad hoc rescue device. I forget which phrases he used, but it's all of them. Right. And that's just not true. I mean, they came up with the out of Africa idea because it's the thing that fit all the data in terms of global genetic diversity patterns, in terms of SNPs and genetic markers, in terms of homo and heterozygosity, in terms of linkage disequilibrium. It all points to an African origin, specifically basically like modern day Ethiopia, that region for humanity. Like, it's not ambiguous. We're not like, oh, what do we do? Like, that's just what the answer is. Y chromosome, what was that?
Really, really quick, I wanted to add in on that. To them, changing science is only okay if it's not in evolutionary biology. It's never okay in evolutionary bio,
Right.
evidently. It's like, to them,
Yes.
like, if we're using Stanning's definition, relativity is a rescuing device for Newtonian physics. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
it's
But
absurd. I'm gobsmacked, by the way.
but saying, well, the mitochondria shows the hypermutation, but the nuclear genome doesn't because it's biparentally inherited, that's not a rescue device, even though for Neanderthals, for anyone that's been following that discourse, like that's the latest version of that. And that's not a rescue device. That's just, it's only a rescue device for evolution.
Yeah.
The next big thing was the Jensen most recent common ancestry stuff. So the Y chromosome numbers, the mitochondrial numbers. And there's a very specific error that Standing makes here. It's that the molecular clock, he says, well, evolutionists say it speeds up and it slows down. And how do we know when it's fast, when it's slow? No, that's wrong. The mutations occur at a constant rate. The differences between a mutation rate, which is the rate at which changes happen, and the substitution rate, which is the rate at which they are fixed. So generation to generation, pedigrees, you get a fast rate because there's no weeding out. There's no filter there. But then as you go back in time, you're filtering out those mutations via selection, via drift, via inbreeding. And you end up landing at the long-term rate at which they accumulate. That's the substitution rate. We're not saying the rate changes over time. We're saying there's a filter where over time you lose some of that diversity. And
Right.
when you come out the other end of that filter, you get the slower substitution rate. And I don't know if he just doesn't understand this or if he's purposefully confusing the things. But I mean, to be fair, he's probably just getting this from Jensen and replacing Darwin, who also says that evolutionists say the mutation rate and evolutionists say the mutation rate changes over time, which is not what anybody says, right? That's just not what it is. And I don't know if Standing knows better. My suspicion is he doesn't. Jensen knows better, and he's just lying to his audience. Like, he knows better.
Jensen is
He
buying
admitted
time,
so in
by
his
the way.
2015 article.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, right, he said, right, he has that disclaimer at the end of that one saying we don't know if this is a germline rate. So
But
he knows that.
Dan, show him in his book. Come on.
Yeah, right.
Show him in his book.
Yeah,
He's
What,
buying
name three
Don't
predictions.
have a single voice on.
Name three predictions. Right.
Yeah.
Did you read the book? Yeah.
Show me in my book.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So next one, evolutionary dates are based on assumptions. No, they're not. Radiometric dating is not based on assumptions. That's observable, it's testable, it's repeatable, and like we have so many cross-reference data sets that show that stuff is valid. It's not even worth it to like pretend it's valid to question it. It's just it's like
That was a
I've
chunk
got
of
a few things in that.
final bit.
I've got a few
Final-
things in that for their assumptions.
Yeah.
First off, Aklo, Pompeii, both of those are just like, what are you supposed to do with this? Why is Pompeii accurate if radiometric dating is wrong?
How is Oklo accurate? I mean,
How
we
is
could predict the
Oklo accurate?
Why is
levels
Oklo
of,
accurate?
we could predict the levels from 2 billion years ago of specific isotopes in those rocks. The only way that works is if fission, decay, and neutron capture all have worked the same for the last 2 billion years. That's the only way those predictions are valid. So we know for a fact that radiometric dating is valid at least 2 billion years into the past. And that's not assumptions, that is direct observation. There's no question.
Yeah, it's that and combined with the fact, so it's not just that radiometric dating supports the evolutionary paradigm of deep time or whatever. It's that if you wanted to get the time frame that they require, you will obliterate the planet, dozens upon dozens upon dozens of times over.
And
You
Standing
just-
loves to say that they have a solution for the heat problem. No, they do not. The rate
No,
team
no.
said they don't.
Dan,
The rate team
he's
said
not
miracles.
saying that anymore. I think he's CPT now because he mentioned catastrophic plate tectonics and Baumgartner's predictions in the
Okay.
debate. And I remember
That's
thinking,
new.
I could have sworn he was hydroplate because I made a whole
Mhm.
hour-long video about him being hydroplate and why hydroplate is absolute garbo. But then you reach the secondary problem, and for those following along in the audience, hydroplate is a proposed explanation, a proposed mechanism for the global Noachian deluge of Noah. I guess that's a little redundant for the Noachian deluge. And as is catastrophic plate tectonics, the latter is supported by, or is, I guess, pushed up by the likes of AIG, ICR, those guys. hydroplate is only supported by Walt Brown. He's just like some dude. And real science.
Walt Brown and Team SFT. Formerly.
Formerly SFT and Real Science Studio. So they got Bob Ennio.
Wait, you're missing somebody.
Humphreys?
Kent Hovind.
Really?
Wait.
Yeah, he's hydroplates. Yeah, he's hydroplate.
He's hydroplate?
He's so hard to pin down most of the time that like I have trouble keeping track of which of the quote unquote mainstream things he buys into.
Well, for those of you out there just concerned about it, the people who do subscribe to catastrophic plate tectonics will admit, and AIG admits this on their own website, that they do not have the heat problem solved. So if you subscribe to catastrophic plate tectonics, you do also subscribe to the fact that you don't have a solution for the heat problem.
Admittedly, the heat problem for catastrophic plate tectonics is significantly less.
Yes.
It's still enough to kill everything many times over, but it's like an order of magnitude less awful than...
So that makes it what, in the hundreds of billions of hydrogen bombs instead of in the trillions?
That's right. You're only vaporizing the granite crust of the earth like
instead of the whole planet.
2 dozen times.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's also the problem that one entire assertion that the continents moved faster despite having absolutely no evidence to support it. It is literally a rescuing device.
Wait, Dakota and Dan, what is it that Colton always says? Race car speeds.
Ludicrous speed.
Ludicrous.
I want to point out one quick thing, which is to say that saying global Noachian deluge is actually not redundant, because there are a lot of people who believe there was a flood to describe that historically happened with Noah and whatnot, but who think it was a local flood. So it actually is an important distinction, because there are a lot of people who we have known in geology some absurdly disastrous floods, right?
Right. Yeah.
Just things that we in our historical period just have not experienced.
Right.
It doesn't look like we're going to experience any of those in the foreseeable future, but they have happened. And so there is the idea that the flood stories like about Noah and whatnot were actually sort of cultural memories of these absurdly destructive floods, but that were not global. So I actually do think it's important to make the distinction, because the somewhat more sane group of people who want to take the flood stories seriously do accept the idea of a local flood.
Well, and fair enough, because cultural memories shouldn't. I mean, this isn't something that's like woo, like as it used to be kind of considered to be. Humans, the way we transmit our history, like literally up until 6, 7, maybe 8,000 years ago. Maybe, I don't know. When does cuneiform pop up, Dapper?
It's about 6,000 is a pretty good estimate for the.
So around 6,000 years ago, convenient. But you know, we're an oral history species. We rely a lot on vocalizations. It's like one of our things. We're mimics. So there's actually a lot of support that, you know, interestingly enough, people from Indonesia have a lot of myths and legends surrounding little people that live in their forests, and a lot of individual, and these trace back thousands of years via oral history and some, I guess, like proto-written work. And a lot of people are proposing, some anthropologists are proposing that perhaps this is a cultural memory of Homo floresiensis.
Did you see Rayward's comment?
Wait, what?
Rayward's comment from 903, why did God flood the earth with molten basalt? Yes!
You know,
sorry.
You know, personally,
I just saw it and I was like, no, we can't not say that. That's awesome.
You know, personally, I like to call the Noah's flood the Noachian sploosh.
Well,
that's, I don't know, TD. That's a little not safe for work for this channel. I'm sorry, Dan. Continue.
How far down are you? Are you only like a third of the way through at this point?
Let's see. I'm about 40% through the list.
Continue.
Okay, this is remember, this was a 10-minute opening. So, I mean, how much can you cram into this? Well, let's find out. So, by the way, just to review, so far we've got a misunderstanding of how most recent common ancestry works, a mischaracterization of the out-of-Africa hypothesis, completely wrong on the numbers for the Y chromosome and mitochondrial most recent common ancestors, a mischaracterization of how dating methods work, and now we're up to barcoding because Standing claimed that there was a paper that showed that 90% of animal species originated at the same time. That's not true. That was a barcoding study which only looks at one gene in the mitochondrial genome. So at best, this paper showed a mitochondrial bottleneck for a number of species all at the same time. Now, here's the kicker. The team that wrote this paper was very specific about the time frame, and the time frame for this mitochondrial bottleneck, Standing maybe would be disappointed to find out, was in the neighborhood of 1 to 500,000 years ago.
That's not great, Dan. It's not great.
May I also note,
So
Standing has been repeatedly corrected on barcoding, including a truly disastrous video by EvoGrad that more or less destroyed their entire position on it.
yeah.
Isn't that also roughly where the math breaks down of you would expect a most common recent ancestor in a generic mammalian population?
It's at some point you run up against saturation in the mutation permitting parts of the mitochondria, so you're going to have, as you go back far enough in time, it's mathematical certainty that you're going to have a most recent common ancestor, and for species that have approximately the same effective population size and reproductive rate, you would expect those common ancestors to be in approximately the same place historically.
It's a species turnover rate, right? I mean, essentially, at some point, everything that was is going to be superseded by, newer, the updated version, so to speak.
Yeah. So that one's not great. The next one's fun because the next claim I have was ENCODE. He claims that ENCODE showed that most of the genome is functional. I think his words were almost all or vast majority. I didn't get the exact wording, but it was.
And he also said that it almost all had activity, which indicates functional. And it's like, no, that's not what that indicates.
Yeah, that's wrong. And here's the thing. So I have my next video is on this specific claim that ENCODE disproves junk DNA. And the great thing about this is the only sources I have to use to show that that's wrong is ENCODE itself. Because they're pretty clear about this. They talk about how, well, we've got all these RNA transcripts that are very low frequency, and we'd expect a lot of spurious transcription, and they're probably not doing anything. Plus, they're not evolutionary conserved. So the idea that ENCODE showed that most of the genome is functional and there's almost no junk DNA is just wrong on its face. And if you read the rest of the papers from ENCODE, you will see that. All it takes is to read all the way through the papers and not stop at the abstract.
It's combined with the fact that, all right, let's say I've got this worldview that is entirely too invested in a single series of studies done by an organization like ENCODE. You would think that on the agenda would be following up on what the researchers say, because if something like the definition of functionality is being called into question, the hope, if you're in favor of ENCODE's definition, is that the ENCODE researchers are going to come out and provide reasonable support for their definition of functionality, which, of course, surprise, what are a sizable amount of researchers who worked on ENCODE coming out and saying about their definition of functionality. That's not a good definition. That's what the people that worked on the project.
To be fair, the ENCODE people some of the ENCODE people play fast and loose with this. So there's a couple of the authors that say things that are just wrong. Like there's one guy who gave an interview in September of 2012, and the most famous ENCODE paper with the 80.4% number came out in October of 2012. And in September of 2012, this guy gave an interview and he's like, we found 80% of the genome is transcribed and it's almost all functional. And the paper does not say that. And he's an author on this paper. And the number in that particular paper was 62% transcribed. So in fairness, some of the members of ENCODE are just not accurately, have not accurately portrayed their own research.
Yep.
But the problem is, you know what you do? You ignore the press releases, you ignore the interviews, and you read the actual papers. And the actual papers, they're very well written, they're very precise. And they go through and they say, we found this, and we found this percent does this. Like for that 62% number, they made very clear that over half of that is introns and exons.
Yeah.
Well, obviously introns and exons are transcribed. That's news to nobody. Like, that's the point, right? So then it becomes that other like 30% of what's the, what is that fraction of it doing? And when you go from, in an interview, this guy says like, at least 80% of the genome was transcribed. You read the paper, it's, well, introns and exons are transcribed, and then also maybe up to 30% more of the genome. That's a lot less impressive, right? But that's what the actual paper says.
You know what though, Dan? Like that's telling. So completely different world. But I've been reading. I've got a lot of experience reading papers based in primatology. So primate behavior, some conservation genetics, a lot of diet stuff, some phylogeny, et cetera. And when I am, in the series of taking these courses over the past year, what my professors have very frequently said is, look, even if you're using an unpopular definition for a term, so long as you define it, people will at least know what you're talking about. It doesn't wreck the study to have a bad definition because they can equate it. If, there are plenty of examples of that. Some of the dentition terminology varies. Like some use buccolingual, some don't. But as long as you're clear on what you're saying, you can still get the point across. And what you were saying, that just reminded me of, those classes, because it sounds like within code, some of the researchers were like, look, this definition, here's what we mean when we say this. It wasn't necessarily meant to spark, a big kerfuffle necessarily by everyone. It was like, here's what we're saying. Take that as it is.
In fairness, though, they do, in that one 2012 paper, they do kind of muddy the waters a bit because they have like a little fact box at the beginning. And one of the little things in the fact box, and I'm just pulling it up right now, so I'm trying to find it. I have it in the PDF, but it might not appear online. But when you download the PDF of this, it has like a little, quick summary thing of the findings. And one of the things in the summary was 80%, we can assign a functional role to 80% of the genome. But then you read the paper, it's 80.4% is involved in some biochemical activity, and then it gives a list of what those are. Yeah. And so, in two different places in the same paper, they're not being consistent. And that's a problem when somebody who doesn't know how to like specifically parse all of the technical language in the paper
or
reads
read the entire paper.
You're going to go to the summary part and be like, okay, 80% has functional, what it has an assigned function, which even if it was all functional, the fact that they said it's assigned function is just wrong, because a lot of it, they admit they don't know what it is, even if they say it is functional. But all of that is beyond the point, because there are more recent papers from them that walk back a lot of that stuff, and they're much clearer about what is and is not actually functional. So the whole encode thing is just a giant mess in terms of creationists trying to use it, because one, they're using outdated stuff. Two, they're not accurately portraying what the outdated versions of those numbers say. So yeah, that's that.
I have a quick question, because I very admittedly, I'm not super in depth on the whole genetics thing. Isn't some of the biochemical activity that's indicated in ENCODE actually the organism trying to prevent
100%.
the parts of the genome in question from actually doing anything?
100%. So, for example, they'll take methylation targets as indicative of function, because methylation is one way you can regulate the ability of a region of the genome to be expressed. And they'll also take strong protein associations as indicative of function. Well, there are proteins called histones that your DNA wraps around. And when DNA is inactivated, it wraps very tightly around histones. And one thing that makes it wrap more tightly around histones is being methylated. So now if you methylate the DNA and are strongly associated with histones, ENCODE's going to look at that and go, wow, it hits two of our things for activity. That must be functional. But in real life, that DNA is super densely packed. No proteins can get in there and do anything to that. And you can't do anything with the DNA. The state that's called is called heterochromatin, and it's inert. It's basically shove it in a box and put it in a corner in your basement so it doesn't get in the way of things, is the point of packing it up like that. And there's evidence. The problem is that you look at the people look at the order in the wrong way, as they're saying, well, it's that we're methylating it, therefore it's functional. And the problem is that it may have actually evolved the other way, of methylation as a way to inactivate things that you didn't want to be active. Basically, methylation as a defense measure against things like transposons and retroviruses, things like genomic parasites. So that flips the paradigm on its head. And if you look at that evolutionary explanation for methylation, then you have to look at methylation first as an indicator of non-function, right? And then second, it was co-opted as a regulatory mechanism later on.
Yeah.
Right? According to that idea.
While you're on the topic of co-option, Ron was asked a question by, I think it was George Bond. I can't remember specifically. I know you've interacted with George before. About co-option. And George was essentially like, hey, Ron, where are all the papers on co-option? When I read
there's tons of them.
Well, and you know, he was very clear to his credit. He was like, I can't find anything on co-option, any papers on co-option on Wikipedia. I haven't looked into co-option's article on Wikipedia. I would think that they would probably link some, but I can't know for certain.
I'll give you one that creationists love, that they use it to refute the idea of vestigial structures, but it's a really nice example of acceptation, of taking a structure that did one thing and using it to do another thing. And the example is the pelvic bones in whales, right? So they have a highly reduced femur and a pelvis, and you look at that and you go, look, they used to have legs. That's evidence that they used to live on land, right? Because nothing that's been in the oceans for its entire history has a pelvis and a femur, right? Those are things from land. Well, creationists say, well, no, those aren't non-functional. They're used during copulation. It's not that that's called acceptation. That's co-option, right? We're taking a thing that did one thing and we're using it to now do a different thing.
Well, and the thing is, it's not even a huge amount of acceptation, because it's not like your pelvic and leg bones aren't involved in mating in most mammals.
Right.
I mean,
it's not just that, but several cetaceans require a third party in order to copulate as well. You know, they have a tertiary individual come up underneath and stabilize the whole deal, which talk about a wingman. But
that's a real mensch right there.
That's a real path.
Today I learned. Thanks for that.
I just double checked the co-option page on Wikipedia. There are two references in it. One of which is a Stephen Jay Gould paper from '82 about acceptation.
What? Oh, by the way, quick,
and page hasn't been edited since last December, so it's been out there for a while.
I just want to put a quick shill out there. I actually do have a video about specifically whale, not just pelvises, but like hind limb girdles as a whole, including femurs and whatnot. It's called A Whale's Tale of Evo Devo, and it goes into things like how we can use embryology to determine what structures are homologous with other structures based on how they form. I go into things like hind limb buds and reabsorption in cetacean embryology, and why we know that those bones are actually hip and leg bones as a result of how they develop embryologically. So feel free to check it out.
I love vestigial structures. One thing I think doesn't get enough attention is vestigial behaviors, quote unquote.
Like when my hair stands on end?
Do what?
Like when my hair stands on end, or
like when your hair stands on end, potentially that. I mean, the erector pili, I guess it would be more the neural response to that than the actual erector pili itself.
Dapper doesn't have hair though.
That's why I said when a human's hair.
He is with humans, right? He is a theropod. But my personal favorite that never gets brought up is the grasping reflex in infants. So yeah. So Dan's got an infant right now, and if he took his infant and put her hands on a broom and held her up, she'd be able to
hang on. Yeah. When I was feeding her before, she had a death grip on my thumb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's vestigial, of course. For those of you out there who enjoy primates, obviously that's a vestigial trait from when you could cling to your mother's fur, because that's something that many of the hominoids have on all the hominoids, to my knowledge, except maybe. Maybe some of the extinct hominids, or hominoids rather, like in our lineage, and maybe some outside of our lineage, artipiths perhaps. But we're talking about a trait that is literally required to survive if you're an extant great ape. You've got to be able to hold on to your mom's fur. If you fall off, she can't cradle you because of the way that they locomote. It's very different from bipeds, which is why I say Ardipiths might be the exception, because they're Miocene apes. They may or may not be in our lineage. They were certainly bipedal. So you've got all these, like, and primate specific, but I'm sure the list goes on of organisms who, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, if I'm remembering this correctly, but behavior tends to precede morphologic change. And if a behavior isn't actually harming an organism, it's also just not going to be as selected against, because it's not like metabolically costly necessarily. It's less likely to be metabolically costly than the whole structure is, right?
Right. The only kind of caveat there is behaviors. It's usually harder to associate behavior, not always, but it's usually trickier to associate specific behaviors with specific alleles. So selection is usually a little bit looser when it comes to behavior, because you're usually kind of a couple steps removed from a specific allele, where it's not like, fur color or something where it's like, okay, there's an allele for that, right? It's usually a little more loosey-goosey than that.
Yeah, not necessarily a one-to-one on the behavior.
Right. Although there are some cases where it is like very specifically one-to-one, but that's relatively uncommon. And I should say far outside my field.
Well, one interesting thing is in terms of weird behaviors and evolution, there's a couple things in dinosaurs that I want to bring up.
Yes.
Because hey, I got to bring up dinosaurs every once in a while. So I'm going to bring up two examples of behaviors. One which is it's almost certainly a sort of vestigial behavior, and the other one is where it's good enough, but it's not ideal. Like, it could be a whole lot better, and I would expect an omnipotent designer to do a whole lot better than this in terms of dinosaur behavior. So the vestigial one is that birds will brood pretty much anything in their nest, even in cases where there's no reason to. So, for instance,
Parasites.
Chickens will brood just about anything that you put in their nest while they're not looking. You can put an egg-shaped rock in there, and they'll just do it. And even in cases where the birds in question will create eggs that aren't fertilized, they will still brood them.
Well, Dapper, the chicken's got to raise that rock to be a good atheist.
Okay, yes. Goodness, I've been consuming way too much of that conflict right now. I don't want to super get into it right here, but the other one, as Dan said, brood parasites. So one of the weird things about birds is they will brood eggish shaped things in their nest, no matter what it is. And also, if an egg were to fall out of a bird's nest, they will immediately stop caring about that egg. There is no impulse to go grab the egg and put it back. No, they do not care. If it's in the nest and it's even vaguely egg-like, let's brood it. Once it's out of the nest, no one cares. So that's one of the reasons why brood parasites happen. So there are species of birds that don't actually raise their own young. They lay their eggs in the nests of other birds, who then just assume, well, it's an egg-shaped thing and it's in my nest, I'd better brood it. And once it hatches, I'd better feed it. But once it falls out of the nest, which is actually one of the reasons why they can do this, they actually push the other eggs out, because the host species typically could not raise both their own clutch and this usually much larger egg. Because, as a matter of practicality, brood parasites tend to lay very large eggs that result in very large young, because that's optimal for them. They get a head start that way. So, again, you get these weird behaviors in birds where it's like, none of this has to be this way. If all of these behaviors were designed by a perfect designer, they could be much better adapted for the actual survival of the particular species in question. And also, it does raise the question, did God design brood parasites as such?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, were there brood parasites in the Garden of Eden? I don't know. I would like an explanation.
Worse yet, you get into parasites like nematodes.
Ooh.
Oof. That's a whole lot grosser.
Yeah, I very much enjoy the occasional stroll through Answers in Genesis's new articles section, because they will very frequently talk about, like, from a conventional science perspective, some very, like, woo questions, and they'll have these multi-page articles dedicated to it, we've poked fun at some of them here before, but like, were there thorns in the Garden of Eden? Okay, like I don't know, maybe. Were there brood parasites? Great question, Dapper. Let's shoot it on over to Nathaniel Jeanson and see what he says.
Wait, why would he talk about it?
Well, really, parasites as a whole is an interesting question, and basically just infectious diseases and parasites. So what I want to know is, which of Noah's sons or daughters-in-law had syphilis? Which one of them had various herpes kinds? Which one of them were infected with ringworm or roundworms or hookworms or all the other things that are called worms that maybe are
not to mention all the specific types of lice.
Oof.
Right.
Dapper, I want to know why they brought a simian immunovirus on board.
Yeah,
IV.
Of the various anthropoid primates on the Ark, I don't know how many there would have been, but which ones had SIV? Which of the cats? Because apparently there were only 2 cats. Did they both have FIV, which is also a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
brought rabies.
There's a couple of those. There are a couple of those. They have a very like human centric and like big flashy animal centric view of the animal kingdom. You know, which is why I found it very interesting. Dan, you probably, I don't know if you caught the entire debate, but at one point Standings talked about how there are so few, you know, species of
oh god,
bear, cats and wolves and whatever. And there's so many different species of birds.
Oh, I did hear that, yes.
Yeah. Hence faster mutation rate in order to achieve this. And as the moderator, I'm not saying anything, but I'm also thinking to myself, all right, on what basis? He also said Jeanson had tested millions with an egg.
So I actually know exactly where that comes from. So the thing with the rates is Jeanson has a whole section of his book where he shows that speciation rates are linear within created kinds. And he actually delineates like a dozen or 2 created kinds here. And he shows that speciation rates within each kind are linear and that this is directly proportional to the amount of created diversity within each kind. The problem is
the graphs where they go
is that
where he says they're linear.
They're not linear at all.
But
they very clearly show adaptive radiation events. And what Jeanson is missing in this whole thing is a discussion of the concept of an ecological niche and the idea that if you have niche space available, that will lead to radiation events, where you'll have rapid adaptive evolution to fill the available niche space. So, for example, among the cetaceans, you get rapid adaptation because it's a group of mammals filling niches that are unoccupied by mammals. For birds, you get rapid speciation events as they migrate to places where birds do not live. So then you can speciate really fast to occupy all the available niches. And
I have a list, and this is on it. But
so
I want to go at a little bit similar but different direction.
Yeah, so Jeanson makes a specific prediction, creationist claim, I should say, that saying, well, given the constant rate of speciation, we should see X number of new species per bird every so often, whatever. And then they found a new species of finch in the Galapagos Islands, which it's a hybrid, so it's not quite what Jeanson's hypothesizing anyway. But also, Jeanson is not saying, we're going to find a new species of bird in this environment. He's saying, we're going to discover a new bird at some point. I mean, yeah.
That's extremely vague.
Yeah, but like, when you ask for a specific prediction that Jeanson makes, the 2 that you always get are mutation rates among African lineages and bird speciation. Like, those are the 2. And the bird speciation one is not specific enough to be testable. It's just, we're going to find a new species.
The Khoisan people one, we don't have. This has been a paper that's been promised to us for almost, months upon months upon months overdue.
I mean, years. It's in Replacing Darwin, which was published in 2017. We're coming up on 3 years now.
Yeah, go take some damn blood samples from the Khoisan people.
Does Jeanson think that when you make a hypothesis, it's everyone else's job to disprove it? Like, dude, no one's going to take you seriously unless you test it and show it's right.
Right, and it's not impossible to go get genetic samples from these people groups.
I mean, I'm sure they exist.
To places.
You can just analyze pre-existing data sets. I'm sure, given all the genomic data that's available right now, they exist.
I mean, I'm not so familiar with the human genetic data. I imagine there are probably at least a few human groups that we don't have really good genetic sequences for.
Amazon groups, probably.
I mean, well, one of the things is that the Khoisan peoples in Africa tend not to be the most available to easy study. I mean, they don't tend to live in big cities and stuff. They tend to be fairly traditional in terms of living in their own villages and whatnot. And of course, that's not a universal thing, but they do tend to be some of the less urban and less available to anthropological or genetic or even medical study. Which, I mean, fair enough. Maybe that is a barrier, but it's not an insurmountable barrier.
Okay, there have been that's your hypothesis. Figure it out, dude.
Right. Oh, one thing I do want to bring it slightly back to the whole parasites. I want to know: did the divergence between gorilla lice and human pubic lice happen before or after the flood? I want to know. I want to know which of Noah's sons was getting really lonely and hanging out with the.
I think they would have been separate created kinds of lice, right?
Look, well, yeah. So the thing,
so the parasites have to be. So the parasite kinds have to mimic the host kinds. That would be.
Well, you would think so, but here's one of the tricky things about human lice, right? There are two species of human lice. There are human head lice and human pubic lice. Human head lice, as you might expect, their closest relative is the lice that infect genus Pan.
Right, because all head lice are more closely related to each other than the different types of lice within a specific species.
But the human pubic lice are more closely related to gorilla lice than they are to the lice that infect Pan, which means at some point there had to be a transfer of lice from gorillas, from the ancestors of modern gorillas, to the ancestors of modern humans that localized to the pubic region of humans.
Okay, you're assuming horizontal transfer. Could it have been incomplete lineage sorting of parasites?
I don't know. I think way more likely that Ham, Japheth, and the other son of Noah was clapping gorilla cheeks.
I have no comment on this. So I have 3 more things on my list from Standing's opening. I have 3 more things. Two of them are direct contradictions with himself.
Awesome.
So Erica broke me.
So here's the first one. Yeah. So here's the first one. At the very beginning, he said that the lack of diversity within species, and specifically humans, is consistent with a recent creation. That we're also similar. That is in line with what you would expect if we originated from a single pair of individuals 6,000 years ago. Okay. But then a little bit later on, he showed a slide that said that it's implausible for all of the diversity we see to have arisen via mutations. And those two ideas are contradictory with each other. So are we so similar that a 6,000-year timeline makes sense? Or are we so diverse that you have to invoke a, dare I say, rescue device of created heterozygosity to explain all that diversity, because you can't cram all of it into a 6,000-year timeline? Which is it? And if it is the latter, if it is created heterozygosity, then we wouldn't expect the most recent common ancestor dates to work for for Noah and Eve, it would be, because you're artificially, through created heterozygosity, making it appear broader than it would naturally be. So you have a series of creationist arguments here that are in conflict with each other. And Standing used all of those within the span of about 7 minutes, but they are contradictory with each other.
Well, there is a very clear sort of variety of strategies that Standing will use depending on how he is estimating his opponent will respond. For instance, I have seen, at least from the very little that I've seen of him sort of interacting with you directly, Dan, he's very careful about what he will say in a direct one-on-one conversation with you, because he knows that if he missteps, he's going to get called out. And in fact, I thought it was kind of funny. He slipped up. He got a little too comfortable with Ron, because at one point he referred to chimpanzees as a human ancestor. Actually, 2 times.
He did it twice.
twice he referred to.
Nope.
What? This must have been where I missed. This must have been when I was away from keyboard.
It
or
must.
when I wasn't there.
Yeah. And
That's hilarious.
I was kind of like, all right, like I feel confident that Standing probably knows the difference, but it's telling.
I mean, maybe not.
Ooh, I'm giving him the credit, Dan. It's telling, though, regardless, that he.
What's worse?
Into a comfort. He was like, it's not like Ron's going to know the difference.
Right.
And he was very. It seemed to me, and I don't know. I mean, we briefly covered it earlier, but he was very specific about where he was keeping the ball, sort of.
What's worse at that situation? Not knowing the difference or knowing the difference and saying it wrong anyway, twice?
It is the eternal question with regard to creationists, which is worse, the ignorance that is accidental because you won't put in the work to find out, or the intentional deception. I don't know. I wish I could. I wish I had the answer, Dan. We're getting into some existential stuff here.
So speaking of ignorance versus deception, here's the second to last thing on my list was the functional retrotransposon thing, and this is a trick I've seen Standing use. I think this is the third time I've seen this. So there's a paper that he quotes, but he only ever quotes in the abstract. And here is the line from the abstract that he quotes. He says, our results demonstrate that retrotransposons mobilize to protein-coding regions differentially expressed and active in the brain. Thus, somatic genome mosaicism driven by retrotransposition may reshape the genetic circuitry that underpins normal and abnormal neurobiological processes. In other words, during, and after embryonic development, you can have active retrotransposons mobilizing in the brain that has phenotypic effects. That's what that sentence says. And he uses that to claim retrotransposons are functional. They're part of regulation in your brain. They're part of developmental regulation in your brain. That's what he claims.
It seems like he's also claiming that they are, during just the normal life history of an organism, jumping around the genome, activating and inactivating.
This is the paper that he's using to claim that. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this because I want to show the contrast between the sentence that he quotes and then where the authors kind of explain in a little bit more detail.
Dan, so what does the methodology look like on that paper, if I may ask?
It's they're sampling individuals and looking for retrotransposon insertion sites that are unique to those individuals, which means those are going to be somatic insertions.
Okay.
So let me just pull this up just 1 second. It's this one. That's the one. Okay. So let me go back to that window so I can see. Okay, so I've highlighted the relevant sentence here. This is the one in the abstract that Standing always quotes, right? From our results to the end of the abstract. That's what he hasn't. And by the way, let me just show you the paper. This is the paper right here. If you want to look up the paper. So now, if we go down, they go into a lot of the methods and how they do this stuff. But let me just find the relevant paragraph here. That gets into exactly what this stuff means. It's right here. Starting here with germline insertions, okay? Germline insertions are rarely found in regions where they generate the deleterious phenotype. Such mutations are strongly selected against during evolution. In other words, the retrotransposon insertions that you inherit, those tend to not do anything because when they're in places that have effects, those effects tend to be harmful and they're selected against. Next sentence. Somatic events, on the other hand, the on the other hand is key there because it's in contrast to regions that are rarely have a deleterious phenotypic effect. Somatic events, on the other hand, are present for one generation and may affect protein coding loci. You know why they're only present for one generation? Because they're harmful and therefore they do not propagate through the population. Meaning that Standing is claiming, based on that sentence in the abstract, that this paper shows that these somatic retrotransposon mobilizations are a day in, day out normal part of brain development. What the authors actually say is that when they mobilize, that's something that our bodies are trying to suppress. And when we fail at that, it tends to cause problems and be selected against.
So it's the literal opposite
right.
of his
literal opposite of what he claims.
Okay.
Okay, and that's just a fact. I don't know if he didn't read the rest of the paper, if he doesn't understand the rest of the paper, but the paper says I won't say in plain English, because it's not in plain English, but the paper says plainly the opposite of what he claims it does.
Well, at least now we know whether or not our parse of that section of his book, because remember, on my channel,
because we were confused about that,
Right, we weren't sure if that's what he meant, but no, that is what he meant. And
that's what he meant.
And just as stupid as we thought,
It's just wrong. He just completely has that paper backwards.
Can you imagine having the confidence to go in front of an audience of people who are legitimately out there in the world and speak about a paper that you haven't read the entirety of and like present its conclusions as concrete when you haven't read the whole thing?
I would think he did read it, but I just don't think he understood it.
I'm actually not confident that he read past the abstract.
Standing's been caught just quoting the abstract before not reading the actual paper.
Okay, so maybe it was.
I
noticed your list. So apparently, Standing didn't cover Dan Grauer in his opening argument.
He did cover Dan Grauer, and he
characterized. So Dan missed that. Okay.
Funny thing.
Okay.
Before we go into the Dan Grauer thing, can I tell you all something really funny that I just learned from CRISPR-Cas9 in the chat of the debate?
You go first, then Dapper.
In the talk where Grauer said, if ENCODE is right, evolution is wrong, I was at that talk. I was in the room for that. It was at a conference in Chicago in 2013. I was there. And I was at Grauer's talk. It was my favorite talk of the whole thing. And I just don't remember that specific phrase. Although if I go back to my notes, I probably wrote it down. But yeah, I was actually in the room when that whole kerfuffle started.
Oh, lovely.
That's all. Just funny story.
Nice.
All right. Erica, I'm trying to share my screen. Just a Walking Fish in our private Discord sent this, and it's hilarious. First off, and I can't.
Okay.
I can't not.
That is amazing. So
Thank you, Just a Walking Fish.
I just have a couple quick things. One of which is, Erica, it looks like you're eating Doritos and not pretzel dots, and I'm disappointed.
Well, the reason is because I made a huge mistake. A huge mistake. Allow me to elaborate. So,
okay,
my local market, my local like town store sells dots infrequently. They'll sell them occasionally, and I think dots is growing in popularity, which allow me to hipster like posture at the lot of you that I have loved dots for quite some time. Recently, because of Dot's popularity, Snyder's Pretzels, who this is, if I may, the alpha Chad of the pretzel world, similar to how AI is the alpha Chad of the creationism world. And so Snyder's recently put out seasoned pretzel twists version, which is it's knockoff Dots. That's what it is. And when I saw this, I was like, all right, I have a limited opportunity here. Dots are at the store, but I do want to try the competitor to see what the flavor is like. So I risked it. Yeah, so I risked it and I bought the Snyder's. It's garbage. It's garbage. I love Snyder's. I like Snyder's for their what do you call it?
I like their slightly honey flavored twists.
Yeah, the honey flavored twists are good. The buffalo flavored
sourdough.
Yeah, those ones are good. The honey mustard ones are good. But the thing is you can't rip off Dots. Like Dots is impeccable. It's just perfect.
Damn it.
And
now I want pretzels.
So I have a bag of Snyder's seasoned Dots pretzels in the kitchen, and they're just not good enough for me to bring them on stream. So instead, I have brought them on stream.
All right, fair enough. My other thing is Sunflower is in the chat and has said that not one of you will debate me, me being Sunflower. Sunflower, I tell you what, you go watch my video called Debate Me, and if you can, if you think that you can, agree to those terms, then I will debate you, because that video is an open challenge. If you want to debate me, watch the video. Send me an email or a tweet or whatever, and I'll debate you.
Debate Dapper on why are not birds or dinosaurs.
I saw Sunflower having discussions in the side chat as well, because Sunflower was under the impression that similar to the show that John Maddox runs, that this is an open mic. we don't do open mics on my channel. We haven't done one up to date, specifically because I don't know. I prefer to vet the people that I bring on the channel at least a little bit. That being said, I have been looking at potentially having a series of bringing on creationists who disagree with the evolutionary paradigm for conversation. And as I said to Sunflower in the side chat, you are welcome to email me. I would be happy to set something up. Dapper is obviously Dapper. And
I just realized Sunflower didn't realize that it was Dapper, the Dapper Dinosaur or Dapper Dino for the YouTube channel who was talking. So sorry about that. I realize it's not obvious when I'm talking because for some reason, when I go on live streams, I have to do the ventriloquist thing where like I don't really flap my jaw a whole lot. So apologies.
Well, everyone here, to my knowledge, we're all very much happy, thrilled, one might say, to engage people who have an issue with the conventional science.
Absolutely.
So long as you're a good faith actor, and what we mean by that is, are you genuinely curious and you want to have the conversation, or is it like a winning thing? The latter, I'm not nearly as interested in than the general conversation. I'd be happy to have you on the channel and talk Sunflower, on the channel to talk Sunflower. Dapper's happy as well in that direction. Dan has a channel.
I periodically have a creation conversation. I have that series that's got a couple of entries. And I'll basically talk to anybody with that. And if people want to have a debate, the way I'm kind of thinking, so I don't have any more frustrating conversations with people who don't know basic population genetics, not to put too fine a point on it, is if you take my challenge, I'll debate you on whatever. But put your money where your mouth is first. I got to know I'm not just going to waste my time So that's kind of where I'm at.
We want people. I mean, I know for certain I speak for Dan and Dapper and TV and Dakota had like all of us really, in that we genuinely enjoy having these conversations. Like we want to engage, and God, we want you to feel welcome. Like we want you to feel as though you really can approach any of us with any kind of general conversation. I can only speak for myself, but if it's a genetics related question, I'm probably going to direct you to Dan, and if it's a dinosaur related question, I'm probably going to direct you to Dapper. So we each have kind of our niche that we're suited to. But please, by all means, reach out, Sunflower. We'd love to have a chat.
Absolutely. In fact, I actually just today invited a commenter to come on and discuss topics regarding evolution and creationism, because one of the things I say in one of my, I think it's my FAQ video, is no, I'm not going to debate you in the comments, but if you want to come on, like I have a method for that. Like you can come on and have a discussion with me. I think the only rule I have is if you're a minor, it's going to be a little bit iffy. Just because not only because of Kappa, but also because I've been burned in that regard before. I actually did agree to a debate with someone, and it turns out that not only were they a minor, but they also, after I gave my presentation, just said, I don't have anything to say. And it was very difficult to actually get a video out of that. So yeah, I was like, I feel bad because I feel like my opening debate just kind of like set this kid on fire, and he just is like, I have nothing. I'm sorry.
So before we
not common children.
Well, before we kind of go a little meta, I have one more thing from the opening, and that's the whole list. And that's the whole list from the 10-minute opening.
Do it.
Oh, I've still got my list.
Okay. So here's I'm just gonna quick run down the list of problems, then we'll hit that last one, and then that's my whole opening, like my list of problems from Standing's opening. So it was the most recent common ancestor problem with what that means in terms of like the origin of species, the out of Africa misrepresentation, the problems with Y and mitochondrial most recent common ancestor, and misunderstanding the slowdown of the molecular clocks, the dating methods based on assumptions, barcoding and what that does and does not mean, the problems with ENCODE and what ENCODE does not show according to ENCODE itself, the contradiction with there's so little variety, it's explainable in 6,000 years versus we need created heterozygosity to explain all of it because evolution can't do it. The retrotransposons and the role they play during brain development, or I should say the role they don't actually play during brain development. And the final thing, and remember, all of this was somehow crammed into a 10-minute opening. The final thing was a contradiction with Orphan Genes, because Standing says that there's several contradictions here. One is that hierarchies support the created model, but also Orphan Genes support the creation model. Well, those are opposite predictions. So if they both support creation, then creation is unfalsifiable in that regard. There's no pattern of diversity that would contradict creation. So we want to talk about testable hypotheses and testable predictions. Pick one, please, because those two things are in contradiction. Either you expect a nested hierarchy or you don't. It cannot simultaneously be both fulfilling predictions of your model. That's the first problem. Second problem is that Orphan Genes supposedly refute the evolution model of nested hierarchies, but are compatible with the creation model. Well, Orphan Genes are typically found in what level of taxonomic group, what rank? Normally, Orphan Genes are found in species. But creationists don't think species represent created kinds. Typically, created kinds are assigned to approximately the family level, which means
which is an arbitrary level.
Which is arbitrary. But according to the creation model, that means that Orphan Genes must be compatible with common ancestry, because you have species that have orphan genes. Other members of that family are lacking those genes, but they're all the same created kind that share a common ancestor. So according to the creationist's own model, orphan genes are not incompatible with common ancestry unless you want to assign created kinds specifically to the species level, which creates lots of other problems we don't need to enumerate right now, which is why it's typically assigned to the family level anyway. So that's the problem with that argument. There's a whole bundle of contradictions in there that SFT did not seem to think were relevant to bring up. But that was one of his big points towards the end there, and it doesn't make any sense. And that's all I got from Standing's opening. Those are all the things that I wrote down that were blatantly, completely wrong in a 10-minute opening.
Nice. Also, I want to say something about the family thing. I think something that might be a good idea is to take a look at various quote-unquote families, because, again, family isn't a thing, right? Clades exist, but the level of these various taxa above species are essentially meaningless. They're just arbitrary. What I would find interesting is to look at the genetic diversity in various families and look at things like divergence time for the most distantly related groups in the family, and see how wildly varying they are across various groups of, and let's just restrict it to tetrapods, because for bad reasons, basically, creationists seem to think that only tetrapods were really important for the arc. So, okay, fair enough. We'll restrict it to tetrapod families and see what the ridiculously wide variance is in like divergence time, which we can use as a reasonable proxy for intra-family genetic diversity. Because it just doesn't work. All of these families are genetically diverse to ridiculously different degrees. And so if they all have the same essential divergence time, which is 4,400 years ago, why do they have such different amounts of genetic diversity?
Different divergence times, same divergence time and same basic mutation rate. Like mammals don't differ in their mutation rates. Right?
Yeah, so
if
why?
you've got all this stuff is the same, why are there all these? Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And the thing is,
surprise.
These are the kinds of predictions that you could be making right now as young Earth creationism with data that we have available, right? Like we don't have to wait for someone to go take blood samples from all the Khoisan people in Africa. We don't have to wait. We could just take a look at the nuclear DNA for a whole bunch of various mammals. And you know what's going to work out? Here's my prediction. Here's an evolutionary prediction coming at you right now on a stream. Yeah. Divergence time for family level taxa, which again, arbitrary, is not going to correspond to a particular time either with evolutionary assumptions on timeline or young Earth creationist assumptions. Either way, they're going to vary on divergence time because the taxonomic level of family is fundamentally arbitrary. There is no such thing as a family.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Screaming my clades.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so we've been going for about an hour and a half. So I'm thinking, TD, you want to give your list, and we can run through it as well.
I'm going to leave out some stuff that's been pretty decently dealt with thus far. And we're going to start with Genes and Set makes predictions.
Oh.
He says it every debate. That's all that needs to be said there. Second, birds descended from theropod dinosaurs 65 million years ago.
Oh, wait.
Did he say that?
Way more than that.
Did he say that?
You're off by a magnitude of nearly 3.
Man, come on.
Yeah.
I missed that. Yeah, I didn't catch that.
Listen, I recently sat down and watched a side note from that, but same concept. I recently sat down and watched Standing's 4 Horsemen takedown. Dan, you were a part of that as well. Or him taking you down was also one of his pillars, his
Am I
tenet.
one of the 4 Horsemen now?
Apparently you are. I think the 4 Horsemen shifts around depending on like who's.
Better watch out. All the attention he's giving me. I'm not going to be able to fit my head through a doorway pretty soon.
Real quick, that reminds me. A couple of like compilations of people to follow focusing on atheism have added me on Twitter as like people to follow, and I'm
nice.
On the one hand, I'm like,
it's really funny.
It's very flattering that you've added me to this group of people worth following, but I feel like you do not have sufficient information to determine that I'm an atheist, because I do not answer that question.
Yeah.
Nothing in my content is atheist specific. Here's an open challenge. I want anyone here. If you can find something in my content that proves I'm not a Christian or any other kind of theist, I'll give you $50.
Wait, hold on. Smokey is in the chat and has referred to us as the 4 soy men, which
there's 5 people here, and
I just need to say that Smokey, almond milk, cashew milk, and oat milk are all way better than soy milk. And also, we need to have a talk about toxic masculinity.
I personally like soy milk. Occasionally, just as
it's gonna be flavored.
Yes,
I don't like plain soy milk. It's just trash.
Dude.
No.
I am one of the 4 soy men of the apocalypse. I'm cool with it. I'm ready to bring down the soy.
Well, I think you're the exception, because there's only four soy men. So I think you're the woman outsider who's
Dapper. Women cannot hold careers. We are to be quiet in
That's why you're not one of the 4 soy men.
I think I'm sort of an honorary
Walking fish is right.
Yeah, I think I'm almond soy. That is accurate.
Yes.
And we love you, Smokey. I to be fair, I realized that the reception has been mixed. I've had only good conversations with Smokey Saint.
Kenny is correct.
But I LPP less so, but me and Smokey have had good talks, so.
Also, my offer is good. Please show me anything in my content that has just demonstrated my atheism, or that I can't be any kind of theist, and I'll give you $50. I don't care. I'll PayPal to you.
While we're on the topic, what I was going to say is, whilst I was looking through Standing's recent video, I guess I haven't been quite as clear as I perhaps should have been. I thought it would have been obvious by the images that I tend to use in my videos, but of course I accepted. Standing kind of proposed the idea that I didn't accept that some of the Australopithecines did indeed live contemporaneously with members of genus Homo. Good Lord. Standing suggested that apparently I think that they don't. Of course they did. Oh my goodness. I've got textbooks like from a decade ago that upstairs. I'm gesturing upward because they're upstairs, but that propose the same thing. I mean, the idea that there wouldn't be heavy overlap, this whole idea of a march of progress is quite silly, and I know I've mentioned that many times.
Yes, you have.
Yeah, what we have is a gradient of traits. What we're looking at is a suite of characteristics that are more basal, in perhaps something like Sahelanthropus chinensis, to a suite of characteristics that are indeed as derived as they can currently be, and anatomically modern sapiens with regard to that lineage. So no one is saying, in fact, least of all me, I've said so in this very conversation, but no one is saying that we know the lineage. Like we don't think that Ardipithecus ramidus, for example, was necessarily in the lineage. It may have been. We can't know for certain. Same thing with Afarensis, Africanus, Sediba, all of the members of genus Homo, probably up to, I mean, we're fairly certain that we've got an Erectus lineage looking pretty good, Erectus heidelbergensis, split into Neanderthalensis and Sapiens, Denisovans, etc. But that's like, Dan is kind of gesturing. It's a genetics thing. Once you get past Erectus,
no, I'm sorry. You're just buying the propaganda. What they actually did is they literally took a jawbone from one thing and taped it to the skull of a different thing. Haven't you watched Standing's videos on this? It's literally, when we say mosaic, we mean literally a combination of different things. Come on.
The thing is, though, Dan, he covered that in the video, and I was like, he very briefly talked about it, and the impression that I got, and I watched this today, so my memory is fairly fresh. The impression that I got is that he very vaguely gestured at the idea that the mosaic structures, and he used the example that I used in my video, such as a clavicle, were actually from basal members of Homo erectus. And I'm thinking to myself, what about the in situ fossils, for one? For two,
my desk.
Like, and I used clavicle as an example because it's easy. It's a bone that is rather short and stout. You can, manipulate the dimensions with that in a way that pretty much everyone can understand. You've got length and width and depth. But the reality is what we're actually looking at. Femoral heads, the ramus of the jawbone, zygomatic arches, the position of the foramen magnum, pieces of larger structures that cannot be separated and misconstrued as being from something else, that are themselves mosaic in nature.
Erica, SFT and Rama have literally taken a picture with a chimp skull, Australopithecine skull, and a human skull, with showing them from the bottom and saying the foramen magnum in the Australopithecine skull, which was directly in between what you would expect from the chimp skull and the human skull, and said that was in the same position as the chimp skull.
They literally won't admit, TD, that the Australopithecines are bipedal, like habitual, or not even habitual. We're leaning with them very much towards obligate bipeds. I mean, the habitual bipeds are like Sahelanthropus and Auroran. Like even the Ardipiths, it's pretty solid that we've got, obligate bipeds that were still pretty good in the trees, but they certainly weren't knuckle walking. And in the same video, he talks about the Laetoli footprints and how the discoverers were like, yeah, they look like they're anatomically human. And they don't obviously source the quote, because if they had, they would realize that this is a first impression thing. You look at the size of the Laetoli footprints; they're minuscule. And
yeah,
you mentioned I've talked to a lot of
Don't they have a slightly divergent first toe?
It's not only that. There's differences in the rigidity of the midline of the foot and the longitudinal arch. How it bears its weight is different. And guess how they figured that out? They got, and again, I've talked to a lot of creationists. I'm fairly certain I've mentioned this to Standing before, but there's an excellent study by the Royal Society that compared the locomotion of modern hunter-gatherers, modern chimpanzees, and how the weight is borne in the Laetoli footprint. So they basically had a bunch of hunter-gatherers walk around in some soft silt, the same thing with some chimpanzees, and then they took casts, and then they compared them. Well, guess what? The Laetoli footprints are intermediate between the quadrupedal, terrestrial, knuckle-walking chimpanzee and the bipedal members of modern genus Homo.
You know what? To quote Troll 2, oh my god!
That's amazing. It blows my mind, and I'm thinking to myself.
Well, Erica, that clearly only shows that these footprints, the Laetoli footprints, are just a mix of ape and human footprints.
Yeah, it's a mix. They were stepping. Yeah. They were stepping on top.
Transitional
in such a way.
Hey, everybody. It's a little after 1 a.m. for me, so I'm going to try to get to bed.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Good night, Dan.
Night, Dan.
Have a
Hope
great
you get
night,
more
Dan.
than 4 hours of sleep.
Thank you. Enjoy talking. I'll catch up in the morning with what everyone said. Thanks for hosting, Erica.
Oh yeah, please. We'll probably end soon, anyways. TD, I want you to get through the rest of your points, and then we'll probably shut down for the night.
Oh yeah. Next, why aren't there more bird species if they have been around for so long?
What?
Yes.
What's the predicted number? I want you to tell me why you think the number of bird species is the number that I'm done.
Because apparently there aren't a limited number of niches, and also species don't go extinct, I guess.
Also, I want to point out that, you want to point out the most speciose group of tetrapods? Birds are contenders. There are a ridiculous number of tetrapod or of birds species out there. Like, you want to say, oh, the age of the dinosaurs ended at the end of the Cretaceous? I mean, you go by species count, not so clear cut. Dinosaurs could still be said to be a fairly dominant form of life. I mean, there are birds freaking everywhere, and there are so many species of them everywhere. They can colonize everything.
With regards to being being endemic to a location, they kick our butts down the curb.
Oh, absolutely. Birds, it's hard to express outside of just straight numbers just how prevalent birds are and how many species of them there are everywhere. You find a location, there are at least dozens, if not hundreds, of bird species in that location. All of them in their own little niche, doing their thing just fine, including urban environments. I don't know if you know, but there's a urban parakeet population in New York City, and they're doing great.
You know, it's not parakeets, but there's a similar domesticated bird species hanging around in London because a bunch of people just released them, and wouldn't you know it, they thrive.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
Birds are awesome.
If you can fly, you suddenly have a huge number of niches, and it differs depending on what animal group it is. Because flying insects can occupy different niches than flying, let's say, reptiles of either variety.
Yeah. And James Downer says dinos still rule the species roost. I mean, yeah, when it comes to number of species, absolutely.
Ooh, I know. If you're talking vertebrates, but it's
vertebrates.
Yeah, it's the meme of the astronaut looking at Earth, and then there's another astronaut with a gun behind him, and it's all invertebrates. It always was.
True. Well, actually, that's one of the things that we pointed out in our first creationist or YEC book club thing, where we looked at Standing's book, Common Ancestry. I can't remember the whole title because it's ridiculously long. It's a Common Ancestry book, where he has a picture where all the invertebrates are connected as more closely related to each other than they are to vertebrates, including things like urochordates and echinoderms and whatnot, and it's crap. But yeah, invertebrates are the vast majority of the diversity of animal life.
They're just cool. They're awesome.
Well, some of them are cool. Some of them are kind of lame.
Hey.
Tapeworms are lame.
Well, I mean, they're lame in perspective of sheer awe-inspiring beauty. I don't look at a tapeworm. I look at a mandrill, but
a tapeworm is basically some skin, a bunch of gonads, and some hooks. That's not fun.
Go easy on him, Dapper. TD, I'm exhausted. We got to finish this stream.
Yes. We're gonna go through. We're gonna try and get through this as quickly as possible. 4, bones in the dirt.
Bones in the dirt.
Bones in the dirt. 3. 5, diversity in dogs means morphology is unreliable for differentiating species.
Boo.
Boo.
Yeah.
Boo on you, because Standing, you have been corrected on this, and you know this is a dishonest analogy to use.
Yes.
It is. 6, created heterozygosity. Another trope. We went over a few of these. He said that phylogenetics brings in the geologic column But where though? Because I don't remember anybody using the geologic column for the phylogenetics, which rely on genetics. It was weird, and he didn't provide anything for that. Yes, and this one says Jensen can't get published because conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. And it's like,
I
no.
Same way.
If Andrew Snelling can get published when he publishes perfectly fine geology work for standard geology, which is just like,
And when he doesn't, when he's not dishonest.
Oh my god.
yeah.
Yes.
And to end off with, in a very roundabout way, said that the definition of kind can be whatever they want to be, whatever best suits them. He said it very, very politely and tried to be wish-washy with it, but that's what he said.
He was amicable, but he was essentially like, sometimes it's genus, sometimes it's family, sometimes we even go all the way up to like order.
Proboscideans are apparently a kind.
Gee, this feels like something that you should be able to nail down pretty neatly into a single peg category, unlike species. But no, there's no standard.
Ugh. Absolutely.
It's the what is it, cognum or cognitum or something that they the creationists use. They're like, oh, you just look at it and you kind of know. It's like, no.
Yep.
Yeah.
It has been historically a terrible way to do science.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I roll it up and down. It's one thing, briefly, again, in Standing's video that I watched today, he's talking about the difference between what is clearly an ape bone and what is clearly a human bone. And here I'm sitting with, you can't see it, and I don't want to pull it out from underneath the bag of Doritos because it'll crinkle in the mic, but I've got a book, Processes of Human Evolution, right here, and it's dozens upon dozens upon dozens of pages in a massive 600 to 700 page book. And we're spending so much time detailing the specific anatomical features that denote genus Homo from the Australopithecines, from the Paranthropines, from the Ardipiths, from Aurordan, from Sahelanthropus, from Kenyanthropus, which is, somewhat contemporary with the Australopithecines. But it's like the people that do this for a living, they got to have it down. But we don't hear that from the Brain Trust.
Yeah. They don't talk about the Parasites either, even though, hey, look, these agree with embryology. Weird.
All right, continue, TD.
No, that's a list. Because a bunch of stuff was touched on by Dan. Because he brought it up.
So
there you go.
If I may, I feel that Ron did a good job. I feel like rhetoric-wise, he was certainly on top of it. I think that between Standing and Ron, they probably could have, outside of the context of the debate, been more specific with what was going to be discussed. I think, personally, purely speculative, that Standing kind of likes catching people off guard. Who doesn't when you're in a debate? Like
I think
fair, yeah.
Yeah, you bring something up and you're like, here's a gotcha, and it makes the other person look somewhat uninformed. That being said, Ron handled it very well, in that he was like, I didn't prepare for this. Like, why would I know this?
This isn't the debate.
Right. Exactly. So I don't really think anybody wins or loses in any of these debates. At all, to me, is how you come across to the audience. And I think this was one of Standing's better performances with regard to like how he was probably likely perceived by the audience. But that being said, obviously us going over it here, it's the same old stuff dressed up in a different costume.
Is it even in a different costume?
Some of it. He did touch a little bit on. He added a couple of new things. He discussed the retro-transpose on paper, which he butchered according to Dan, and it does seem reasonable to me to characterize it that way. But he's adding new bits and pieces, incorrectly, but he is adding them. So credit where credit is due. He's at least trying to mix it up.
I mean, that's better than a lot of creationists do. Like, how many times have all of us seen the same Kent Hovind opening and initial rebuttal?
So many times, it actually like I could peel off the surface of my like.
It's not even fun. It's not even fun
My
playing
name is
bingo with
Kent Hovind.
Kent
I'm
Bingo.
here to tell you why evolution is a fairy tale.
Yeah.
I listen. If you want to believe your religion, that's fine. You just can't teach it in schools.
I mean, there's a reason that.
Dollars.
So I'll say this for Standing. Standing tries to add in new stuff, and he changes up his arguments sometimes. But, and there's a big but here. Big but, sorry.
Huh.
But yeah, so it tends to come back to the same thing, and it almost always comes down to created heterozygosity,
Yep.
which as much as you want to say it produces all these amazing predictions, find a prediction that's actually been confirmed, Standing, because that's what counts. Making a prediction is great, but it means literally nothing in science until it has been confirmed and until you have multiple novel predictions that have been confirmed.
Yep.
When you have that, come back, and then, okay, that's an interesting thing. And the other thing is, like, genetic entropy is the other thing he comes back to, and it's just not a thing. If it were a thing, bacteria would all be extinct by now. All of them.
When presented with genetic entropy in a conversation, it's not even worth addressing. And the reason is because it has a name in biology, error catastrophe, and it has been wholeheartedly roasted by the entire biological community. The reason
literally never observed.
No, literally never observed. And the H1N1 thing is tossed around. Dan has an excellent series of that on the Debate Evolution subreddit on as to why that's silly. But yes, I have been accused of going easy on SFT. I find SFT to be a fun person to engage with. He's always been cordial, which, you know, while the bar is
a bit of a sweetheart.
Yeah, he is a bit of a sweetheart. Yeah.
I was saying you are a bit of a sweetheart. You're nice to people.
Oh my God, Dapper, that's sweet. I thought you were saying Standing was a sweetheart. I think by creationist standards, he is.
Oh yes, by creation standard, yes, he's much more of a sweetheart than say Nephilim Free.
He's much nicer than John Mack.
Or Faithful, Honest, and True. Who?
Oh, you mean the comedic genius?
Yeah, we
make more FHT
videos have had Faithful, Honest, True, and I have had to censor. I'll just say this: my last pre-recorded video had at the end. Listen to it, and it's more than half me having to bleep out Faithful, Honest, and True.
FHT's response to you is like, you know, they say art is only art because it has a certain emotional response, and it certainly elicited an emotional response from me with watching it. I wouldn't call it art.
It mostly centered around how gay he thinks I am on the basis of literally nothing other than that he disagrees with me. And I'm just like, okay, I don't care.
Look, Dapper.
It was so funny, though.
Dapper, your censored version of that video better resembles an auditory barcode than anything else.
That's true.
Impeccable. Oh my God, that was.
I just started. I'm sorry.
It's very funny. Yeah, and I think we all try to do this, but you separate the ideology and the proposed ideas from the individual as best as you can. Sometimes it's not as easy.
Yes.
I thank Standing for making it easy. Yeah, I've had nothing but good interactions with him. You know who's also great is Bill Morgan. He's a lovely person to interact with.
Yeah. Although I've heard that he's not as open to being on Modern Day Debate as he was, because I wanted to have my discussion with him about dinosaur evolution on Modern Day Debate, if possible. But apparently James says that, he's not super open to that anymore. So I don't know.
I wonder why. I don't know. I think some people
what if we alternated between my channel and your channel with you doing the moderation each time.
Would be happy to do so. I very much enjoy moderating. I think people are, and I'm not sure whether to take this as a compliment or not. I'm choosing to take it as a compliment. I think people feel a bit disarmed around me. I try not to blame my XX chromosomes, but that might be.
It's a factor. It's not the whole factor, but it's a factor.
It might be a play. The Quiet Gorilla says, how much of SFT's debate script is coming straight out of his books? A lot. That's not even a dig. It's very factual. That, I mean, I'm literally looking at my copy of his book right here, and you know what? I can prove a point. A lot of it. This whole thing's annotated. I'm working through my second kind of recording of my library.
You're bringing up the book. That actually brings up something important.
We never got to that video that we wanted to get to. That means we have to.
Yeah.
We'll have to do another meetup here in a couple days so that we can really dissect that video.
I'm free Friday.
Well, I also want to point out I have a Saturday slot that is currently completely open.
I'm not doing anything Saturday. I'd be happy to come on and talk about it.
So we could do something on my channel on Saturday about that. So it seems like it was a debate prep for standing, and I don't know even what channel the debate happened on, but there was so much nonsense on that I would like to address it.
I haven't even watched the video yet. I was too busy watching the Four Horsemen video. I'm feeling very flattered to be considered a horseman. I almost need to do like a doodle of like a gibbon riding like a skeletal horse into battle.
Why wouldn't you? And it should be protecting the library of errors.
It should be protecting the library of errors. That's what it needs to be doing. I'm in the process of doing like a cool Wan Shi Tong style gibbon. So we'll see. But with that, shall we close? Are we good?
Yeah.
I'm good. Right. I don't know about Dakota.
No,
we covered a lot of points and covered.
We absolutely did.
Listen, gang, if you're looking for some stamina, you're gonna have to look at another channel. This crew cannot go 9 hours like the LPP channel can go. We don't have it in us.
I don't even. Who wants to watch that?
I can't sit. Listen, as much. This is like the 2 hour limit is my watch and being directly involved limit. Like that's my limit for both. Which is, we went pretty long, but I had a great time. So
I did too.
I hope everyone else did. Tune in on Saturday. We're probably all going to be on Dapper's channel. Tomorrow, I'm exhausted, so I'll probably put the links in the description tomorrow for everyone. But tomorrow, tomorrow I'll put it up for all the channels. We will likely be on Dapper's channel on Saturday going over an SFT video. So it's going to be really fun.
Oh, no. Colton just said, if Standing's book deserves to be in the Library of Errors, does that make his work an error catastrophe?
Yes.
Lovely.
God damn you, Colton. Comedic genius.
The only other thing I had to plug is Thursday midday-ish. I'll probably be on Cheshire Vic's channel doing some funny comment reading. Nothing serious, but I'll probably be there. So
I can link Cheshire's channel in the description when I do that tomorrow. We all support each other around here, so.
Absolutely.
All right, gang. Stay gentle, stay modern. I don't know. I need to come up with a good, welcome gentle modern apes. That's my intro. I need something unique for the outro. I'll be thinking on it. In the meantime, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.